Inmost is an atmospheric puzzle game with lovely pixel art, developed by Lithuania-based indie studio Hidden Layer Games, which combines puzzle and combat phases. Its music was written by young Russian composer Alexei Nechayev, who also composed the soundtrack to the excellent platformer Unbound Worlds Apart, released in July 2021, and more recently physics-based puzzle platformer Time Loader, and his piano playing is lovely to the point of absurdity. This game tells a very sad story through 3 characters, each one having a well-defined gameplay with things they can or cannot do, a specific narration and a universe, an existence even, which goes from real to imaginary. A little girl, Lizzie, short for Elizabeth, almost locked in a house whose other occupants do not seem to be her parents. A middle-aged man, called the hero, wandering around a castle and its surroundings, hence his other name, the Wanderer, meeting NPC after NPC, helping them but sometimes hurting them too, and a knight who explores towers and dungeons with a sword in his hand in order to collect paint crystals. Despite living in seemingly different universes, these 3 characters are each an aspect of the same story, a story that doesn't involve only them, a story so sad and personal that it is hard to imagine. Yet, with great accuracy, Inmost manages to speak of what we cannot say, Inmost manages to express the inexpressible. This video is not intended to explain the whole story of the game. I will do it briefly so that the video remains understandable for those who have not played the game. It is not intended to unravel all the links. I will not theorize about the meaning of each of the characters from the tales. I'm not interested in that. I just try, as in each of my videos, to analyze the artistic choices of this game, to what extent the gameplay, the animation, the music and the sound design, all of this tells the story of Lizzie, Adam, Astrid, Zach and the little girl. I'd also like to point out that Inmost deals with difficult topics, bullying, depression and death, in a metaphorical then brutally realistic way. I will not elaborate on those themes, however there may be some brief moments that are difficult to see and or hear. I'm Untamed Fox and welcome to Video Game is Art. The story opens with a cutscene setting the main elements of the game. We see a spark transforming a stone floor into a hill of flowers, then giving birth to a tree, as if drawing it before it comes to life, blossoming on its own. Imperceptibly, this tree changes, it transforms. Where there were leaves, we suddenly see only almost dead branches covered with a black matter that drips while the tree continues to grow, now seemingly attacking the spark. The silhouette of a tall tower appears as it is struck by lightning, and it's now a castle that is being built as the helpless spark flies to its top, where another spark bathed in red light is trapped, obviously in danger. The helpless spark falls back to the ground. We are then introduced the first playable character, but we won't see his gameplay until much later, the knight. He holds out his hand, the spark lands in his palm as if appeased. The knight then brutally closes his fists, destroys the spark and throws it behind him, resuming his journey. In a single gesture, the knight is thus seen as a negative character, all the more so as he seems to lure the spark with an attitude that is meant to be welcoming. He looks at the spark, lets it gently land in the palm of his hand, contrasting with the brutality when he destroys it. Several elements imperceptibly reinforce this negative feeling. Concerning the knight, we can also see that he is holding his sword in his hand, it is not held in a scabbard. This suggests that he is here to fight, that he has just done so or is about to do so. We do not know why, we do not know what his intentions are, but we can see that he is ready to fight. On the contrary, the spark seems to calm down as the knight lures it. Its wings gradually stop in the character's hand. The knight's gesture appears all the more brutal. He closes his fist on it. We can see that he brings it closer to his body to underline the force he exerts, and then throws the spark far behind him without a glance before running away very quickly. When we see his first actual gameplay sequence, it really looks like it's following this introduction. All the tension that builds up when the spark is in his hand while we're wondering what will happen next vanishes as this very action makes us understand who he is. It doesn't matter to the knight, who soon starts running again, determined. There is one last ambivalent graphic element in this cutscene: red. When the spark is about to hit the stone floor, then when it creates the tree, it is charged and bathed in a pink aura, almost reddish. The second spark enclosed in the castle appears surrounded by a slightly brighter red. Of course, when the knight crushes the spark, the whole scene is tinged with red, and the spark is drawn as a red cross when it bounces off the ground, as if this spark was something alive. It's a color we will find several times associated with death, like for the little cat, danger, and childhood. A few times we will see a flag on top of a house where a child is in danger, where her room is now empty. It seems that this color is associated with both creation and destruction, life and danger, for example, blood that's flowing, but also blood that's dripping. Following this cutscene, the game will introduce the other playable characters: a little girl, Lizzie, a man, Adam, and then, again, the knight. The first sequence shows us Lizzie's gameplay. Her small stature allows her to climb on almost anything, even a small shelf, sometimes quite high. However, she can't jump or climb very high. For instance, she may need 2 stools placed one on top of the other. This is dangerous, she is small and fragile. She can also move in narrow spaces. She can use the air ducts. She can't attack, but she will never be in mortal danger. Her gameplay doesn't involve any attack or protection. On the contrary, it is completely oriented towards reflection, as she asks herself many questions about her situation and what's happening in the house. While this lack of attack suggests that the little girl is fragile, it may also show that this house, while disturbing, is no danger to her, although she does feel unsafe there. Indeed, the first sequence shows her evolving in a seemingly realistic world. First her room, and then the rest of the house, disturbed by some confusing elements. There are large spider webs in her bedroom. She's woken up by a thud, which perhaps makes the link with the initial cutscene. Was it her dream? But instead of going through the door of her room, she goes through the vent. She's standing up, which is dangerous. Is she locked in? Does she feel locked in? We also hear crying coming from another room, and as she runs away through the vent, we can see the silhouette of a couple reaching out to her. Then a light chases her. We instinctively run away from it. A black mass moves at the window, which seems to break the glass and almost engulfs the house. And most of all, as she takes her coat to flee the house, the shadow of the knight, his sword still in hand, appears on the other side of the front door as the whole entrance suddenly catches fire. This is disturbing because we know the knight's intentions, at least towards Creative Sparks, but at the same time the contrast between the place, realistic and contemporary, and the knight, less realistic because he appears too suddenly, like a fear of the little girl, and from a visibly different time, unless he's back from a role-playing session, after all, what do we know? Well, all of this makes us doubt this ending and, in hindsight, the whole scene. We understand that no knight is actually about to enter the house, but this knight is therefore a figure she knows, reinforcing the link with the first cutscene. The two stories are not independent. In any case, the knight represents a person she is afraid of and who prevents her from going out, from running away. One could even fear that he is coming for her. However, we don't find out who this little girl sees as a threatening knight. What's sure is that this little girl is not feeling well. She's all alone in this house, in any case unsupervised. Her universe is completely closed on herself. We only see her room on the screen to reinforce this feeling of isolation, even confinement, and a little bit of the outside. Later, when she's in the tree hut, it's even worse, it's really tiny. Everything is drawn in blue-green, the storm rumbles, in short, that's a lot of fun. It's more than boredom, we really feel a deep unease, anxiety, she wants to escape. Another element that is typical of the different gameplays in the game, but even more so in the case of Lizzie, is the fact that some decisions are irreversible, which leads to destruction. She knocks over the books when she climbs onto the shelf, the grate of the air duct breaks when it falls on the ground. These small events will become more and more important in the little girl's sequences. Later she will break a large window in the kitchen. After trying to run away, she finally stays in the house but will gradually destroy it, and where any child would fear her parents' reaction, she doesn't care at all. Her wish to run away is stronger than the fear of what her parents might do, which leads us to doubt their relationship quite quickly. Are they her parents? Presumably not. And what is this house? Here comes the second gameplay sequence with a man this time, Adam. He is taller, older and therefore more dynamic. He can jump, roll to avoid some of the dangers, the dark matter, but he is still powerless against the world in which he evolves, like the little girl. He has no attack, while he can take damage and die, attacked by several types of creatures. At the beginning, he has the longest gameplay sequences, but as the story unfolds, it balances out, especially with Lizzie. His puzzles are classic. He has to find objects to progress in the big castle. He often has to destroy walls too, recalling the destructive aspect of Lizzie's gameplay, but it is less poignant because just as the knight was an obvious image, he could not be real compared to the place where the little girl was, the castle cannot really be there. Contrary to Lizzie, he isn't destroying the place he lives in. The castle is, moreover, populated by this dark substance that attacks and kills it, and I don't know about you, but I have never been attacked by dark matter, which sometimes screams, by the way. Rather, this castle seems to be a place of memories. The areas are hidden on the screen before being revealed, as if fragments, memories were coming back to us, so the destruction is not in vain. We're breaking what prevents us from having access to our memory. It also prevents us from having access to the level design in advance, but let me believe in my metaphors, please. We can also note that the objects are used automatically. There are no inventory mechanics. The puzzles are perhaps not so important as the symbolic nature of the exploration of the castle. Adam also has flashbacks or flash-forwards, which often turn out to be gameplay sequences with the knight or Lizzie, those aren't cutscenes, from which he wakes up out of breath, visibly hurt. These characters, these events, are probably not unfamiliar to him, as in the first one when he finds himself as if thrown into a house violently. It is in fact his own house.
Do you remember?
He thus seems to make the link between the two other characters, at least between their two worlds, the real one of the little girl and the imaginary one of the knight, first because his universe seems to be halfway between reality and metaphor, and because he has access to the two other characters in various ways, through those sequences he seems to remember. Like Folidzi, his animation shows his humanity, his weakness. He tries to cling to platforms and walls, but he cannot actually climb them. When he falls, he lands heavily on the ground. He falls flat on his face, but if he falls from too high, he dies. He can crawl like the little girl that we sometimes see in very narrow and dangerous ducts. He is strongly humanized, even weakened, especially at the end of the game, when the truth is revealed. And that's when we discover the first gameplay sequence of the night. When we see him emerging from a beam of light and preceded by the sound of his footsteps, we already have a negative feeling about him. We have seen him twice, in the first cutscene when he destroys the spark, and at the end of the little girl's first sequence when he appears behind the door, associated with violence and danger. His footstep is heavy but fast. He has a goal. We are also aware of the fact that he always keeps his sword in his hand. He obviously has an attack and a strong desire to fight, or even worse. It could also be a way to protect himself rather than a more aggressive attitude, yet we are influenced by the first scene where he proved to be violent. And indeed is the only character with an attack in several directions, a classic attack to the left or to the right, during which his sword stays perfectly straight, an upward attack and a violent downward attack, as well as a kick to knock down boards, objects that block his way, as if some things were unworthy of his sword, while accentuating the violence of his entrance. Well, I know what you're gonna say. Link also opens chests by kicking them. That is true. For now, his attack is a way to defend himself against the dark, slimy but living substance found in the various locations of Inmost's world. Heavily armed but very sharp, he also has a dodge, a move during which his sword again remains straight, a way to show his strength and determination in his quest. In fact, it doesn't look like a sword, rather a machete. It doesn't even sound like a sword, but it works so well. He can then make his way through the castle in a very particular way. As he's wearing an armor, he can't jump. He's completely stuck to the ground but has a grappling hook. His gameplay is thus a mix of combat and puzzle platforming, a platforming that doesn't rely on jumps. He just has to find his way, hence a mild puzzle aspect still there, and then use his grappling hook. Everything contributes to the violence of the sequence. His attitude, leaning forward, head first and sword in hand, straight ahead, in order to attack almost without thinking, his posture when he falls from a platform, dynamic, legs straight and joined. The character manages to overcome his handicap, the armor, by a tough attitude and a breathtaking way to go further in the dungeon. The animation of the grappling hook is crazy fast and the screen shakes a little when the knight lands to accentuate the weight of the armor, like the planks that bend when you walk on them. And most of all, the sound design is fascinating. You can hear the armor clanking with each step, the sound of the bricks falling, the grappling hook is extremely realistic, the whole scene is bathed in very reverberant acoustics which amplifies the slightest sound. We are in a church or a castle, in any case a building made of stones, and stones make a lot of reverb. It's very violent and yet extremely pleasant to play. It's a complete change with the other two characters. His gameplay makes the game very balanced since it moves away from the previous puzzles to focus on action, fight. But, as we know, the knight isn't motivated by the best of intentions, and at the end of this sequence, he kills a priest. It looks like he's ripping his heart out, but there is no blood and the sound is strange. He has in fact just collected a pain crystal. In addition to his armor, the knight has a second hindrance. We will discover it soon after. Another element is almost an integral part of the gameplay of each one of the playable characters, or rather of their story, and that's the narration. Each character has their own way of sharing the story. Lizzie talks a lot, except in the first sequence, where she hardly talks at all, as if she still didn't accept the situation she was in, since she is trying to escape. If she escaped from this situation, there wouldn't really be any more questions to ask. However, she is interrupted in her escape, therefore she must stay. After that, she first talks to herself, then to her stuffed rabbit, which she quickly finds in the cellar. She also makes him talk in a rather strange dialogue where the rabbit seems to have information that she doesn't have. Maybe she guesses things in this very oppressive house. He sometimes has very strange reactions. The fact that the little girl uses direct speech, it's always her who's talking, or Astrid, seems to indicate that she is evolving in a real universe and reinforcing her gameplay, only made of puzzles, that she is trying to understand why she's there. She's analyzing everything out loud. Besides, her actions have consequences. When she goes back to her room, the opening of the air vent through which she had escaped at the beginning of the game has been sealed with boards, and there's a present on the table, a present she has no interest in. She can only see the box that will allow her to go and get the stuffed rabbit. Later, it's the same thing for the broken window in the kitchen, basically repaired with boards. On the other hand, she hardly talks to her parents, well, the people in the house, if at all. She talks to her rabbit. Astrid talks to her once, violently, and especially the little girl talks to Zack once when she thinks she has understood what has happened to her, why she's here in the house living with two persons who are not her parents, and asks to know the truth. The Knight has an external narrative. It still uses direct speech, yet it is a story, a tale, told by someone else. His universe is therefore imaginary, even allegorical. However, this narration begins with a connection to the real world when the narrator of this story, also a girl, calls out to someone.
Do you remember?
While an elderly man, our third playable character from the castle, Adam, aged, with his recognizable pixel beard, is about to leave his house. It is a slow but well-balanced sequence where the limited gameplay of the man allows to listen attentively to the beginning of this story. It makes no doubt that it is an important one given the insistence with which the narrator calls to the memory and the gravity, the solemnity almost, of the music. This story is a tale about flowers. Only later will we learn the rest of this tale when the knight goes in search of paint crystals, weapon in hand. For the player, the link can be drawn between the girl who talks to Adam, the girl that came up with the tale, and Lizzie, because the young man in the house, Zack, hardly looks like Adam. Without being the same person, they would be part of the same family. The narrator would be related to Adam since she talks to him, and the little girl to Zack since she lives with him. But the narrator could be the same little girl, Lizzie, older, and Adam could be Zack's father. The three stories are therefore connected at this point, although this is not necessarily clear in the player's mind as the relationships are guessed at, assumed, hardly mentioned. And most of all, why would Lizzie, now older, speak to the father of the man she lived with so directly? There is another similar narrative, that of a NPC from the castle, the storyteller, who in exchange for paint crystals he only wants to look at, tells us another story, seemingly the same, but not quite, actually. We will come back to this later. The third playable character, Adam, does not speak. He listens, he collects, while he tries to make his way in the castle. For now. Just as his world is halfway between real and imaginary, creating a bridge between the little girls and the knight's universes, his lack of narration, he doesn't speak and there is no voiceover, the silence that characterizes him makes him a link. He listens to the stories of the NPCs he meets, helps them as much as possible, sometimes hurts them involuntarily, as when he makes this other little girl fall near the well, or the cat a little later, which however saves them from the creature. He doesn't say anything himself, he doesn't respond, because what he experienced didn't require much of a verbal response, rather an action. Although the three characters are clearly defined after each of their first gameplay sequence, their connections are still difficult to establish, and most of all their story remains obscure, as if encrypted. There's a reason for this. The characters in most are confronted with a pain that is difficult to put into words. So how can you talk about what cannot be said? Adam will try to remember. Lizzie will imagine a story. The knight does not even exist. He is in fact a man, Zack, who tries to calm his own pain, to deny it, by replacing what he and his wife have lost. The following chapters will then slowly unravel the links between the characters until the point where what could not be said will finally be revealed, from the moment where the little girl will make the truth come out. Now I have to detail the storyline of each of the characters, because if you haven't played in most, it will be hard to understand without knowing what it's about. Lizzie's story is simple. During the game, she lives in a house that is not her childhood home, with a couple that is not her parents, Astrid and Zack. Scared, she tries to run away from the house, and then, after her attempt to run away fades, which we saw in her first sequence, she starts exploring the house in order to understand it, seeing as she can't get out. She gradually discovers elements related to childhood. A childhood there are no traces of in this house, except for her: a stuffed rabbit abandoned in the cellar, a tree house, a small car in the garden. After hearing a thud in the attic, she figures that Astrid and Zack are kidnapping children, held captive in said attic. With the help of the stuffed rabbit, she tries everything to get there, but when she finally manages to do so, there is nothing. Just a raccoon. The rabbit convinces her to keep looking, however, noticing that there is a chimney but no hearth. She then discovers a room filled with children's things. Reinforced in her belief that children are indeed being abducted and held in the house, she confronts Zack, demanding the truth about her and her parents. So her story is rather structured, as she has a clear goal. Adam finds himself in an abandoned castle, overgrown by brambles and strange creatures made of dark matter. He makes his way in that place, opens the condemned areas, helps a desperate cartographer, meets a family of cute kittens, but most of all he meets another little girl, first at the foot of a well, then behind a door as she commits suicide. The way his storyline unfolds is more organic. There is apparently no goal, as he has no narrative at all, no objective is announced, so he goes where he can go, helps those he can help. The knight is not confronted with puzzles of the same type. His platforming has a slight puzzle dimension. He has to read the level design, but nothing more, rather with combat, which is organic too. He attacks all the creatures in the dungeon. However, unlike Adam, the knight has a goal: stealing paint crystals by brutally killing people, not creatures, at the end of the dungeon. First, a priest. In the second dungeon, an extremely important one, he attacks a couple in a place ravaged by flames to then steal a strange thing from them. After another dungeon, the knight's second hindrance appears, much worse than his or more. A terrifying creature, the Keeper. After each dungeon, the knight presents himself before the Keeper to return the paint crystals he has just collected, before the Keeper, with a gesture of contempt, throws some crystals back at him. These crystals are important to the knight, who has another purpose, hidden away from the Keeper. He cultivates a flower that he feeds with these paint crystals. But this flower, the narrator tells us, is not his. The flower is, of course, Lizzie. The link between the three stories had already been made when the narrator spoke to the older Adam, who we then guessed was connected to Zach, the young man in the house where Lizzie lived. The image here is ultimately clearer than Lizzie's actual experience. That night is Zach. The flower is Lizzie, who was stolen from her parents, the couple at the end of the burning dungeon, or so she thinks, because remember, this is her tale. The keeper is Astrid. The moment when the keeper appears in the night storyline isn't arbitrary. Zach's place is interesting. In the house, he isn't much present, he is only seen coming home from work, and when we see him, he is often very close to the frame, almost outside, in fact, nearly hidden, powerless. Yet he is the one who takes care of Astrid and Lizzie. We see him bringing them food, each in her room, and he's also the one who decorates the child's bedroom and gives her a present after she tries to run away. While his wife lets her pain speak more often, he is more restrained. We never see him speak, like his father Adam, and it's only when he's out of sight that he finally lets himself go. As the night, however, is omnipresent before the appearance of the keeper. Introduced during the night's third sequence, they will take more and more space while the character of Astrid is developed in Lizzie's storyline until the climax. The keeper's first appearance coincides with the change in the way the girl looks at her, Astrid. At the beginning, she blames Zach, making him responsible for his wife's suffering. They argue, she hears her crying. So we do not see the keeper. Later, with the stuffed rabbit, which she makes talk, remember, they are rather afraid of her, like in that scene when they're afraid of just walking behind her. Rightly so, since her behavior is frightening but understandable afterwards. In the end, the man remains human for the girl through the character of the night. She will even allow Zach to take her in his arms, while Astrid, the keeper, is not. The child seems to reconstruct both her own story and that of the knight as she understands things in their relationship. The knight's second dungeon is a burning dungeon, at the end of which the character kills a couple and steals their flower, mixing what she believes him to be guilty of, her parents' murder, which didn't happen, with what she probably remembers from a fire which did take place. But if the keeper is collecting paint crystals, it is because they also have their own flower. A flower that is now a child, whose face we do not see but whose silhouette is perhaps familiar to us, the little girl in the castle. The three stories develop rather slowly, in stages. They are mixed. Although the main character would be Adam, since he's the one whose storyline seems to be the longest, Lizzie perhaps arouses more interest, rather empathy, because of her strange presence in the house, still unexplained, and her search for answers that feeds our own curiosity towards her. Her making this false assumption, the abducted children, gives her a very strong objective and allows the player to bond with her even more. We go along with her as she explores and investigates, escapes, then confronts Zach. At this point, the story is no longer enough. The metaphor must fall away, the silences must be filled. The player must step aside and become a spectator, a powerless witness to a story now revealed, a story that the characters themselves had previously been living powerless to. The gameplay disappears to be replaced by long cutscenes, 20 minutes that will never be interrupted by gameplay again, giving back their voice to the characters who could not speak and finally giving a response to the questions that could never be answered. Lizzie was talkative but only had a stuffed rabbit as an interlocutor. Her questions were never answered. The man in the castle helped without speaking. The knight was the metaphor of a man who could not confess the truth. We can no longer interact, we collect the pain of the protagonists. The couple from the house, Astrid and Zach, had a daughter, and it seems. Bullied by her classmates, she ended alive. Later, the young man saved the little girl, Lizzie, from a burning building. The parents did not survive, so Zach took the child in. It was impossible for Astrid to accept this child and to accept her husband's affection for the little girl. Consumed with sadness, unable to live while her daughter was dead, she killed her husband, then killed herself. The young man's father, Adam, arrived too late and was unable to save either of them. He did, however, go looking for Lizzie. He probably knew about her, as he is seen instinctively going into the child's room and then into the others, obviously looking for someone, Lizzie, who had returned to the building where she had first grown up. Once again she was saved, once again she was taken in. This time, between the two characters, a bond was formed. It is indeed a necessity to make some connections in a game where the narration is ambivalent, at the same time very present, through the little girl, rather talkative, who then becomes a committed narrator, and the storyteller, almost doubling the previous narration since he also tells a story, a tale, but very cryptic because Lizzie is always asking questions, focusing on something that does not exist, at least not the way she thinks it does. She thinks the people she lives with kidnap children. And the narrator, an older Lizzie, takes up the tale she had imagined as a child to tell her own story, thus a rewriting, rather a sublimation of what she has lived. We learn the story first through different prisms. We can't expect the storyteller to be clearer. This NPC also speaks using images, tales, revealing us the key to the whole story in exchange for a few pain crystals. In order not to lose the player, what connections can we make? We can use connections that we could qualify as temporal, that is to say, suggest a link between several sections of the game, sometimes close together, sometimes a little longer. This can consist in bringing together two sequences associated with the same character, notably for Lizzie. Her actions have consequences. I already mentioned that the grate she breaks while trying to escape is then boarded up. The kitchen windows too are boarded up after she is injured. Her rabbit comments on the evolution of her room. It is better decorated, proof of an evolution. The cobwebs we saw at the beginning have disappeared. Time passes normally. We see Halloween decorations. This choice is not insignificant. When the story is revealed, we see a short sequence where the couple's daughter is cooking with her mother, Astrid, with a pumpkin and other decorations clearly visible. It can also be a connection between two sections associated with different characters. When Lizzie wakes up at the very beginning, it looks like she has just dreamed of the night from the introductory cutscene. Or Adam in the castle, who seems to be reliving the sequences he is dreaming of when he finds himself projected into the house or when he opens the door to the mines. Sometimes even characters that are supposedly different are in fact superimposed, like when the knight that Lizzie thinks she's seeing is none other than the young man, Zach, returning home from work. We can also use strong, significant elements that will pass from one character to another. It can be colors. The treehouse under the setting sun, which painfully recalls the burning dungeon, itself an evocation of the burning building when the little girl was saved. Or the red, which is often seen in the game. It can be forms. At the beginning, the monster behind the bench seems to threaten the man by placing his hand above his head. Later we find this same threat when Lizzie retrieves the teapot near the gate in the garden. The building where Adam lives is symmetrical to the building where Lizzie lived. Moreover, there is a kind of symmetry between the two families. One loses its parents, the other loses its child. There is even a symmetry in Adam and Lizzie's sequences since she explores the house as he explores the castle. It can also be an enemy. In the mines, a silhouette helps us in a puzzle. It is similar to one of the enemies attacked by the knight. Or an object. The rabbit we see in Adam's room is Lizzie's cuddly toy, which means she lived with him for quite some time. The bench at the beginning of Adam's gameplay is the one on which the girl comes to join her grandfather at the end of the game. Even a gesture. Lizzie, now an adult, approaches the elderly man who raised her. She has a hand gesture as when she learned the truth about her parents. There is another symmetry between Lizzie and Astrid. They are strangers to each other, yet there's some strong symmetry in the way both characters are shown, which makes their relationship very unsettling. We see them each in her room as Zack brings them food. At first, Lizzie almost believes her, and the children she believes have been kidnapped, to be locked up, and thinks that after freeing the children, Astrid will be able to escape too. Lizzie's feelings change, however, as we have seen, up to a painful scene in which their reactions are nevertheless always symmetrical. Astrid threatens Lizzie with a knife, telling her to disappear. A little later, whereas Astrid paces in front of the door, suitcases and boxes at her side, Lizzie has a gesture towards her. She extends her hand towards Astrid, but the latter refuses this gesture. Lizzie then rubs her hand and, like any angry child, throws her little rabbit at Astrid, who reacts like the child just before. She recognizes her own daughter's cuddly toy. Seeing this rabbit always causes her pain. She seems to hesitate and hold back tears as she sees Lizzie playing with it once. But here another symmetry appears. Astrid's daughter did the same thing once when she was angry about her being bullied. And finally, this link is the character itself. Each of the three playable characters is a link, a connection, voluntary or not, between the two families, Lizzie's and Zack's, but more than anything, this link is Adam. The universes respond to each other, which makes everything very coherent, but they also blend, especially in the castle where Adam, a character from the real world, is confronted with actual elements from Lizzie's tale. And yet, despite these undeniable links, the game still manages to make what seemed to be clear even more confusing, like this NPC, called the Murderer in the game files, and who offers us his black heart, mentioning this witch the storyteller also talks about. The tale of the storyteller then seems to come to life as this character warns us. The witch is about to take what is most precious to us, thus announcing the death of Adam's son, Zack, which will blacken our hearts, as in the tales of the storyteller and the narrator. Yet one would easily believe that this character is the witch herself, and there's a reason for that. This NPC is hidden in the carcass of a creature that is not unfamiliar to us, the monster behind the bench, and that looks like the terrifying keeper. Who is this murderer with a darkened heart? We will know nothing more. The metaphor used in the two stories is clear, but some elements may remain confusing. The two stories, the one told by the narrator, Lizzie, now an adult, and the one told by the storyteller are slightly different. There is no witch in Lizzie's story, only a keeper, gendered as male in English, whereas in the storyteller's story, the witch is there. It is obviously Astrid, and it is less easy to know who represents the keeper. If one could think that it is the witch, it's however gendered as male at one point. However, it cannot be the huge creature mentioned by the storyteller at the beginning of this story, this creature being gendered as female. The storyteller's tale is, however, clearer, and there's a reason for that. Lizzie's story is not the truth. Adam knows it. That's why the storyteller urges him to save Lizzie. So Adam has his own version of the tale, which becomes less and less bothered with images in order to tell Lizzie the truth up to the moment when all symbols, all metaphors disappear. The world, rather the different worlds of Inmost, is dull, but it manages to vary the color palettes. The colors are mostly grey, blue, green with red also, whose ambivalence I already pointed out. The plot contrasts strongly with the other colors. It's the only one that looks almost vibrant. It is upsetting. We are often locked up in the castle, the mines, the house, in places with little light. And when there is light, for example when the little girl comes out of her tree hut, it is an orange light evoking a setting sun rather than a rising sun. And in this case, the light in the trees recalls the fire in the knight's second dungeon and thus the fire in the building where the little girl lived before. It is only at the end, during the credits, when we see Lizzie with her grandfather Adam, that the light finally seems warmer. Even in Lizzie's room, the light is cold, bluish, while in the small rooms where the objects that belonged to the couple's daughter have been stored, it is warmer, orange. Lizzie rejects what is offered to her. Zack gives her something after she tries to run away, but the little girl doesn't care about it. She throws the gift behind her. What's in her room is therefore cold for her at that moment. Afterwards, it's a bit different. On the other hand, she uses the box to retrieve the stuffed rabbit she discovered in the basement. She systematically turns to things she discovers by herself, things that are hidden, the rabbit, the little car, the kettle, but associated with a significantly warmer light. The different places are rather empty, the castle, the house, but the castle in particular is overgrown with unwanted elements. Brambles, dark matter, even NPCs seem to have only taken control of it. This castle doesn't seem to have a precise purpose. We don't see any vestiges of any kingdom. It is a host of memories, since each of its places will trigger a memory for the playable character. It is indeed a metaphorical place, seeing as it is mentioned several times by the storyteller, who will talk using images until the end. The relationship between the little girl and the two people she lives with is very disturbing. The house itself is disturbing, and it took me a while to understand that it was her house, or at least where she lived. The gate in the garden is overgrown with brambles, again, like the castle, and the little girl is attacked by a strange shape while retrieving the kettle. This is disturbing because her world is depicted from the beginning as very real, although almost unreal given its sadness, but this is different. The swing is broken. In the veranda, all the flowers are wilted like the one in the kitchen. Inside, everything is gloomy. It's probably the gloomiest place in the game, even when the sun comes out a little. Large cobwebs hang in the room where the child wakes up, although it will be decorated with care later. What could bring some joy is put aside. A chess set, a piano, a gramophone. However, during a sequence, the music is played on the gramophone. There is dust on the books, the lipstick is dry. Children's toys are hidden under a pile of leaves in the cellar. On the shopping list, there's whiskey. Lizzie analyzes this environment through her own confinement. Zack gives her a cage to have a bird. She sees him as someone who tortures animals, identifying herself with the bird, and in return considering that her own torture, being locked up in this house, would be one for the animal too, being locked up in this cage. This already very sad house will become even gloomier when the little girl will explore it, because she will break many things, the vent grid in her room at the beginning, a large window in the kitchen when she falls from a shelf, repaired later with basic wooden boards. She will end up moving the oven, moving the clock, and breaking the fireplace, leaving a hole to the cellar where children's things are hidden, but kept. Finally, it will be the scene of a tragedy whose traces cannot be erased. The third playable character, Adam, encounters many NPCs, both pacifists and antagonists. The antagonists are many creatures, that dark screaming substance, sometimes humanized, except for the strange skeletal face, or taking the form of an animal, small bats, a boar, then spiders, including a giant one. The pacifist NPCs are often locked in a deep melancholy, a masked man in the attic of a house, a sad little girl at the bottom of a well, a cat locked in the castle and whose family is found later, a clumsy cartographer. This recluse who offers us his black heart. Although they often have dialogue, none of the NPCs are dubbed. There are only two voices, that of the narrator, Lizzie, now older, and that of a man, Adam, the third playable character, whose voice marks the denouement of the story. In addition to being a metaphor of the inability to speak that runs through the entire game, this helps to characterize their mental isolation. For example, the little cat wants to get out, so we have to find the key. But once we find the key, the little cat doesn't want to get out anymore. The little girl is sad. She is at the edge of the well and we make her fall. It is scripted. We then see her again, almost ghostly, walking in the castle, her head down, which suggests her importance in the story. She is the daughter of the couple in the house, since she is noticed without doing anything. We only see her sadness. I have previously emphasized how the animation puts the emphasis on the irreversibility of some decisions. The grid of the air vent, which breaks when falling on the ground, the walls of the castle that are destroyed to make other areas appear, and on the weakness of some characters. When they fall, Lizzie and Adam are completely lying on the ground. When the child falls on the ground, the shape of her eyes is different to show she's in pain. In her case, I really like the detail of making her walk faster and faster when she's carrying something heavy to emphasize her young age. This is amplified by the sound design, with a lot of fabric and falling noises, quite loud and mostly highlighted by the acoustics, generally rather reverberant. On the other hand, the violence of the antagonist is exacerbated by the animation. I have already detailed that of the night. There's also the first boss who attacks us. When it jumps, it is in full extension, while the screen is filled with a vibrant red, very disconcerting. It is fast when it wall jumps, and even trapped in the brambles, it looks like it can still hurt us. Even off-screen, it is scary when it launches itself to the right to kill the cat, if you haven't made it fall. In fact, in the adjacent room there's this little cat, locked up. Before leaving the room, you can either leave it alone or make it fall. If you leave it alone, it stays where it is, but then it's killed by the boss. If you make it fall, it is out of reach and the boss spares it. But whatever the outcome, when you see the boss running into the room where the little cat is, you can't help but feel scared. In the house, the two adults, Astrid and Zach, look like ghosts. The man is absent, he comes home from work in the evening. The woman is there but doesn't create any bond with the little girl. She is there without being there, she cooks, reads. But when she reads, she seems absent, at least absent for us, we cannot interact with her. She waters a long wilted flower, cuts her vegetables again and again, seems to be reading the same page of the same book. Her animation is sometimes mechanical, repetitive when she's cooking, I wouldn't go near her if I were you, sometimes more fluid when her emotions overflow when she runs away. We switch from one to the other very quickly to translate her mental instability, like when the little girl gets hurt. The woman reaches out to help her, but suddenly, deliberately and obviously drops her book on the floor and leaves the room, making her lack of interest in the child's suffering extremely clear. Another time she pushes away the child who seeks her comfort, the latter being frightened by the husband who comes home from work. He's the knight for her, therefore an evil figure. The work on the rhythm of this short passage is very pretty, with this moment of tension, of expectation, which unfortunately is resolved on the exit of the young woman, the distress of the child, and, hardly visible but definitely there, the husband, saddened by the situation. We find again this detailed work on the rhythm of the animation at the end when Adam rushes to the couple's house after Astrid has called him, where he discovers first his son, then his daughter-in-law dead, and goes looking for the little girl. There are a multitude of small details that betray his state of mind, jumps, little slides, even a roll, but to keep on moving he puts his hands on the ground. At the beginning of the scene, he even opens the door with his elbow. It adds some fluidity, and it shows Adam's distress. There is this rhythm again when the little girl questions the young man, and she hits him, to the point that the screen shakes slightly. Then she calms down, and they both embrace. We can see that the little girl is softening, and that she responds to the young man's hug. He means her no harm. And finally, neither does Astrid. It's a very difficult scene to watch, but after killing Zach, overwhelmed by the pain of losing her daughter, she makes some gestures towards Lizzie. This is very confusing because Astrid has always been distant with Lizzie, violent even, to the point of threatening her with a knife and wishing her dead. At the very end, Astrid picks up the stuffed rabbit, the cuddly toy that Lizzie would never let go of, and places it near her. It is very symbolic for two reasons. Firstly, she makes a gesture towards Lizzie, whereas she ran away from her almost systematically, except for threatening her once. She makes a gesture which looks reassuring, since she brings to her, without, however, giving her directly, the small companion to whom Lizzie was very attached. Secondly, it is undoubtedly her own daughter's cuddly toy, left in the basement, in the dark, after her death. All the objects that belong to her daughter are hidden all the way down or under leaves. The bedroom itself has been abandoned since there were large cobwebs at the beginning of the game. It was not a sanctuary unlike Lizzie's room in Adam's house, where the little plush toys still sat, which seemed to have remained the same, despite Lizzie's departure after a while. Does she see her own daughter at this point because of the confusion caused by her injuries? Does she see Lizzie? I don't know. In any case, she finally holds something that belonged to her daughter and brings it to the one who is not her daughter. We can guess that she does not give it to her directly to maintain a distance with her, but here this distance is not related to her anger. On the contrary, it rather seems that she does everything possible not to frighten the little girl and to show her that despite how it looks, she means her no harm. She doesn't kill her, doesn't hurt her, doesn't make any brutal gesture towards her, and although she still has a knife in her hand, she doesn't get too close to the frightened child. Finally, she hands her the letter. We don't really see if she uses both hands, which would be very respectful, but she does not move at all so as not to frighten Lizzie and moves away from her at once. Although she could never accept Lizzie, although she could never understand Zach's affection for this child taken in by some strange miracle, but who was not her daughter, as strange as it may seem, while the kitchen is nothing less than a bloodbath, and even though Lizzie never really saw her, but as a monster, as the keeper, Astrid means absolutely no harm to Lizzie. Thank you for watching this video. I haven't finished working on Inmost, as there will be another video, an analysis of the soundtrack composed by Alexei Nechayev. But for next month I will come back to Hollow Knight with a video dedicated to the music and sound design of the game. Be prepared. In the meantime, I can recommend you the usual things. You can subscribe, leave a comment, like the video. Well, nothing new. Okay, thanks again and goodbye.